Art of Intelligence podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Merritt is the CISO to Rico, and it is a phenomenal security company. She has been added to this last year. Merritt is also advising a couple other companies. Some of the things that I love that Merritt has done in the past, which I think is really important and relevant to this discussion, is that she has worked in security in all three branches of the U.S. government and private sector, including Federal Communications Commission, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Office of U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, and U.S. Court of Appeals for Armed Forces. And then most recently, right before Rico, she was in the office of the CISO for AWS, my former workplace.
I've been in private companies world for about a year and a half now. I'm the CISO at Rico, and I advise a small handful of young companies, including Andesite, Expanso, Encrypt AI, and Level 6 cybersecurity.
That sounds very impressive. So let me ask you a question. Can you tell me, if money was no object and you could go anywhere you wanted in the entire world and do whatever you wanted with whoever you wanted, what would be your dream vacation?
Do I have like unlimited time?
Yeah. So no worry about kids, no worry about work, nothing. What would be your number one awesome thing that would happen?
Well, I think I would want to bring my kid because otherwise I'd miss her. But, my parents actually, when they were, just out of college, did a trip around the world. This used to be a thing. You could get like a, one-way plane ticket, and basically you could do as many flights as you wanted, but you had to be going the same direction. You couldn't zigzag. And because this was, whatever it was 40 years ago or something, there were countries that they went to that you couldn't go to now and vice versa. So it was kind of a snapshot of geopolitics as well as a really grand adventure. And they made some friends. I think I'd want to do that, like do a real, like, long-term commitment to a lifestyle of traveling.
They do. That's excellent, by the way. I've heard many stories about stuff like that back in the past. Like one guy that paid like $1 million and got unlimited flights around the world for him and one passenger back in the 90s. And he was using them all the time, like got so many miles. And then on top of that, he got miles for the free flights that he was getting. So then he could give those out to other people. So that was wonderful. They do have a cruise ship that does the same thing, that goes from the United States to the Mediterranean, around everything, Africa, and then off to Asia, and then comes back to San Francisco. But just to give you what I have as my favorite vacation is, you start off in South Africa on a train where you have the entire train car to yourself, and you have a butler who lives on the end, and then you have a living room and a bedroom, and the butler brings you all your food. No one can come in, and every day you stop going north into Africa, and then the train stops, and then you switch trains in Europe, and then go take that train all the way through Europe and end up in Turkey. And that's the one I want. It's about $15,000 per person, and it's 1 week.
For $15,000 in a week, I'm sure there's a number of cool things we could find
Yeah,
to do.
you
I'm
and
not
me.
a cruise ship person, like living in Miami. I am a train person, so I could get on board, so to
Yeah,
speak.
it actually lets you sleep. So not to take too much of your time, I'm trying to make this as bite-sized as possible, but it's always so exciting talking to you, Merritt. You've been to a couple of my events. We've had many conversations in the past. I wanted to jump into this podcast's, reason for us to be here. The number one thing that I have learned as a AI person working at DataStax and getting that AI message out has been that many customers have no idea how to use AI. They buy AI and they're trying to pigeonhole it into things that it doesn't even need. You don't need to spend the money on it. You don't need to do that, just so they can say that they have AI. So I know that Rico, the company that you're currently working for today, has a new article that came out last year by Kate Turchin, and saying that a lot of reports that you've created for the state of SaaS security in 2024, and this is your inaugural cybersecurity research. It says that the report reveals critical trends in strategic opportunities. And one of the things that it says was that on average, companies are using 17 generative AI applications which is a big increase this year over last year. Can you maybe give us a little bit of background on what your thoughts are on AI and the 17 different generative AI applications?
Yeah, so Rico does SaaS security, which means that everything from actually knowing what you have in your environment, which will be a mix of real productivity and development apps that your enterprise needs, and a couple of things that you didn't your employees using, and then all the way through posture, so like how you're configuring those securely or not, and over to more advanced heuristics, so surfacing alarms around the use of legitimate credentials in those applications. Now that folks are building modularly, by which I mean like you're not going to go roll your own CRM software, you're probably going to use Salesforce or one of their competitors. You're not going to build your own, data lake or your own AI agent even, right? You're going to use existing application based use cases of those. So that being said, it's challenging, and I would assert it's basically impossible to know what's in your enterprise unless you're doing it in a programmatic way, which is what Rico does. So we are, able to tell you what's in your environment, and that's one of the things that report surfaces, which is that on average, there are 17 of these Gen AI apps that are in folks' environments, and commonly the CISO or CIO don't know about those. And that's true, especially for AI, because a lot of these are open source and or have a free tier. So whereas, CIOs tend to rely on employees asking for purchase orders or for reimbursement for software licensing as the way to know what they're using. In the case of AI apps, that is not necessarily the case. Of course, you've also got co-pilots and just about everything this, time around. And, I think beyond the kind of discovery aspect, which is really important, you should assume that your employees are using it, although we can tell you authoritatively which employees are. At the same time, like part of it is just understanding how they're using it and in what context and how you're going to, make, as you point out, make sort of meaningful advancements and allowing folks to use AI for tasks that you might be okay with. And then at the same time, being able to guardrail it to use cases that you find acceptable or to certain, maybe you want to only allow American AI apps within your ecosystem, for example, you could do that. So it's really about having the information to then make some of these judgment calls, do some of that ongoing pruning, both of what you have and of the permissions and data that it has access to.
So that brings up an interesting point. DeepSeek being a Chinese company, and I know AWS is currently kind of embracing that a little bit. And we're going to be talking about that with Amit Singh in one of the next podcasts that come up. So having a Chinese AI company. And so when dealing with things like AI, even though I have a working knowledge, having AI do a search on all of the internet that's public to everybody is one thing, but having AI do a internet or intranet search on your own company's data and having that set up, is this something that DeepSeek, do you think that is, and I know you're not a DeepSeek expert, but you are a security expert and you are someone who's worked in a federal government atmosphere. Is DeepSeek something that companies should worry about when it comes to their ability to keep their IP 100% within the United States?
I think any AI app is something that can be a threat to proprietary data or sensitive data that your organization cares about. And yes, if you look at DeepSeek's terms, you'll see that they are storing their data in China. And we know that China does not have a delineation between public and private sector, and specifically between the military and their private sector. I think there are good aspects of DeepSeek, which are that it is an open source project, so you can inspect the code. But if you look, for example, one of the companies I advise, Encrypt AI, did a report on DeepSeek and pointed to the levels of bias and poisoning that are within it, which are much greater than the American models that we've seen so far. Folks will need to make some judgment calls around that. I think more broadly, though, part of the challenge is just to even understand what your employees are, what data they are inputting, as we saw, and this is where Rico's responsive. So yeah, I do think it is something you need to kind of be cognizant of and not turn away from. We've seen escapes within AI models, in addition to the fact that AI is not some perfect arbiter of information. We've seen, poisoning, we've seen drift, we've seen bias, we see escapes, we see, folks being able to determine what questions you've asked the model and be able to get information from that. For example, if you have folks asking finance questions to an AI model, and if that were to be resurfaced, retraining on the questions that you are asking, there's a lot of potential security implication in the way that folks are engaging with AI in mostly kind of unguarded ways right now.
So would you say that is the biggest threat for AI when it comes to security is the human portion of that and the data that humans are kind of putting into it while they're asking those questions?
There's a lot of security concerns around AI. Part of it, as I alluded to, is actually just around like how good is it? And you often don't know exactly how much fidelity you should assign to the outputs, whether the AI that is, for example, as we get closer to some idea of agentic AI, where an AI could really make ongoing judgment calls, like it also means that when it gets it wrong, you're going further down a wrong decision path. I think that, so for example, for use cases within security, we need to know how accurate we can be with our models. And we use AI in our security shop. We also use it in our product to surface insights, but we also have a rigorous security research team that looks at these and considers the kinds of confidence intervals that it requires. Certainly, data exposure and kind of unwitting, like folks allowing AI within their environment in ways that they haven't addressed is just a very open issue. Even without, you see over permissioning, you see most attacks these days are using legitimate credentials. Once they're in, you don't even have to be a very good bad actor these days. You can query and you don't have to lateral around in any particularly quiet way. You can find what the, golden gooses that you're looking for. So anyway, there's a number of ways in which I think use cases of AI present security ramifications, and also ways in which AI can be a friend to security teams. And those, are two sides of the same coin sometimes, because I do think the future of security is contextualization. It's not just like, should Merritt have access to this, but did she access it in ways that we, have seen her do before, or that are consistent with a good actor in good faith, or not.
Fantastic. I think that's very informational, and I appreciate that answer. Let's change it up just a little bit, if that's okay. So, I'd like to learn. We've learned what RICO is, what it does, and the ability to see what your employees are doing and what's going on in your environment, and possibly using Agentric to make decisions on that. But let me ask you this. Can you give me why we're actually here? The reason or the most unique and awesome use case that Merritt Baer, super security specialist person, can tell me about AI? Like, what is something that gets you excited? What is something that you feel is unique or will be exciting and will be unique?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of these that I think, will manifest. And again, I think there are good elements of this, and then there are elements in which this exposes some security risk. But I got my start in my career working against child sexual exploitation online. And we see platforms that want to go after CSAM being able to use AI agents to root out some of these known images. And given the emotional toll it takes on human reviewers, not to mention the lack of scope and scale that they can do, I'm really looking forward to having AI do some of the horrible labor that we otherwise had humans doing online. That's kind of like a side bar, because I also recognize that we're concerned about deepfakes and about AI producing disturbing images. But I think that we should be looking for the bright spots, as you point out. I think overall, at the landscape level, it is more related to what I'm working on at Rika, which is being able to contextualize behavior. So thinking about how to surface alerts that are genuine, that are prioritized, that allow for the humans who are always inevitably going to have some role here to focus their efforts on the right stuff. And the way that you do that is by getting better over time at pattern recognition and piecing together a lot of mosaics. While we have always worked on that, including with machine learning, AI has gotten a lot more fidelity around being able to not just surface some of those alerts, but to give you more contextualization on how confident it is. So you can make human judgment calls. And these are often business judgment calls. Like, do we want to, is this a high traffic day that's a good thing, or is it a DDoS attack? And just based on the nature of the traffic, you might want to make some judgment calls about that. So being able to be more informed by having the computerized ability through AI to parse really vast amounts of data and then turn it into something cleaner and human consumable. That's something that security teams are excited about because it's really practical. It gives a summary of context rich indicators. So, based on raw and enriched data. So, what we're trying to do is actually give folks the tools to make those decisions about whether this is a legitimate access pattern, about whether they want to go in and stop access or remediate it. And this could be to any of your SaaS apps or to things like OneDrive or ShareDrive files, which are within an app ecosystem. And this is based on a mix of interactions that include app to app and your identity store and everything else. So you're getting a set of indicators that are based on behavioral context and includes things like whether you have flagged this as being proprietary or sensitive data in that file. I think that when we think about agentic AI, we're really thinking about AI that goes down an entire decision-making process independent of humans. And I see that as actually just a futuristic thing. But right now, what we have is the ability for an AI agent to take some of these processes that AI is doing on our side that allow for folks to basically better understand and prioritize the alarms that they would get on what looks like questionable behavior. Often, what we're trying to get at is not breaking down the door. They're using legitimate credentials, but they may be doing behaviors that, taken as a whole, are suspicious. And then you make a decision about how you want to take that from there. And it's a business case decision.
Nice. I want to reach back out to the process that you talked about when the child pornography situation, where you're saying that the AI can go through tons and tons of videos without being affected emotionally, as any human would be if they were having to watch this disgusting videos that these folks are watching or creating, and then flag them and get them to the right authorities in the right manner without having to cause an undue burden on people that are actually watching the videos. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Has that made things faster, easier for folks to be caught? Has there been more use cases inside court where people are getting convicted more because of this? Or is it just a streamlining the process that is helping more on the health side for the people that are watching it?
Yeah, both is my understanding. Child sexual abuse material is one of those unique areas of the law that, that exists as a carve out to the First Amendment, essentially. And as such, there is a public private entity called National Center for the Missing and Exploited Children, that to which folks like Google and whomever your private company is on which traffic is moving actually have to report suspected child pornography, and it gets reported to the FBI and to other folks, stakeholders. So it's a really interesting process in the sense that they have much more mandate to reach in and find out and proactively report. That being said, we saw recently that Meta has said they're not going to be monitoring traffic and content anymore. I don't know how long that will last. Some of these are political wins, it would seem. Wins. not wins. But that being said, yeah, I think it is both in itself a truth and also representative of the kinds of things that I hope we can get AI to do, which is some of the really awful, like there is no way that a human can look at these, images and videos, this content and not be disturbed by it, or I should say like a healthy person would be disturbed by it. And so it has been long the case that folks who have to review it to find out whether it truly meets these standards end up being subjected to it. And it's really awful for prosecutors, for, reviewers of content, et cetera. And that if an AI can take on some of that and not have its feelings hurt or not have its psyche, enduring PTSD, I think that that is a win for humans. There are many tasks that we're hoping that we might be able to offload in search of a higher order kind of human experience in the world. And I think that we haven't gotten close to that. We ended up with a lot of kind of dubious test cases of whether AI is making our lives better. But I hope that some of these kind of traumatic areas, we saw this with robots going to war too, where, as Pete Singer famously said, the best thing about a robot dismantling bombs is you don't have to call its mother when it gets blown up. So I think we're going to continue to hopefully find ways that we can really allow humans to feel the kinds of good experiences that we want to save for humans.
Great answer. Yeah, thank you for your service that you've done for the United States government in the past, and the continued security that you're doing for not only RICO but the other organizations that you're advising. Just maybe to touch on a little lighter subject, if it goes the way that everyone's hoping instead of the opposite, what is something that you would love to see? Like you said, that I like the robot or the AI, the artificial intelligence, to do my dishes and vacuum while I get to go right. What is something that Merritt Baer would like to have as a robot or an AI to take some things off your plate? Pie in the sky.
I am still bummed that driverless cars seems like such a far away. Like we had really thought that was within reach, and certainly seems to be getting further away. I will tell you, some of the current ones are not, like space travel, and having someone else write poetry for me is not the thrill that I would go for. But I think things that get at the manual, menial tasks, and that can be true for security teams, but it can also just be true for like the human experience, the kinds of things that you don't look forward to in your day, but that everyone has to deal with, whether it's like laundry or dishes or other pedantic stuff, I think is important for us to at some point feel like we get a little better at over time. I think that I'm curious to see how we will be able to harness AI for other uses in R&D, and like for advanced science, and how it will transform things like medicine. Certainly we're seeing some advances, but also things like cancer are not a one-time thing, it appears, that will be somehow solved. It seems like it's going to be a process-driven thing, just like we get the flu vaccine every year. I'm curious how we will learn more about some of the processes around us through the ability to speed up some of these cycles.
Very nice. Great answer. So before we end the podcast, because we are trying to make it as bite-sized as possible, hopefully someone is listening to this right now while they're running around the track or going through a park. But can you give me what's next for Merritt and Rico? What are your goals with Rico? Where do you want Rico to go? Where is Merritt hoping to do in the next 20 years when it comes to this stuff? And are there any events that you'd like to talk about, or anything that's coming up with Rico that you'd like people to come and see you at?
Yeah, I think we are at an inflection point for SaaS security right now. I think that folks, the same way that, cloud security a few years ago, all of a sudden became kind of a recognized area, that with this shared responsibility model, AWS wasn't going to do it for you. The entity building on the cloud would be responsible for the security of it. As I used to say when I was at AWS, if you can toggle it, you own it. So I think the same is sort of coming home right now for folks in SaaS. And I hope and expect that folks will have that same realization, and that, the success of folks like Wiz will start to mirror folks like Rico, who are working on the shared responsibility model for SaaS security. Um, in terms of this year, we will be at Black Hat and RSA. I will be at CISO Masterminds and a few others. I also am regularly in my city, which is either Miami or Denver, or your city, wherever you are, having breakfast with CISOs, because I love to get peers together and have a good conversation. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, or I can give contact info to folks in the comments here. Feel free to reach out if we should have a CISO breakfast in your town. And otherwise, you can get in touch with us. Happy to have a conversation about what we're working on or about what you care about. The CISO community is a real resource, and I'm happy to be part of that.
Did you have a podcast, don't you, that you run yourself?
No, I only show up on,
Merritt, thank you so much for taking the
no.
time to meet with us and the AI community of Art of Intelligence. If you would like to join, we have Art of Intelligence has a LinkedIn private group where we post nothing but AI news. And then this podcast, of course, is on Spotify and soon to be on Apple as well. I hope you're having a phenomenal day, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you, everybody.